إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله تعالى من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وقال تعالى: يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. وقال تعالى: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كلام الله، وخير الهدي هدي نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. We begin by praising Allah Azza wa Jal, thanking Him for who He is and for what He gives. And then we commence by praising and sending salutations upon the greatest human being to ever walk the face of this earth, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. For verily everything that we do in our lives, and especially when it comes to the religious matters, can be traced back to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And it is He who is the source of guidance for us. And so we continue to praise Him. And it is heavily blessed and a highly rewarding action that we can do on Fridays, to send praises and salutations. So I encourage firstly myself and then my brothers and sisters to do as much praise and as much salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as we can. And so when I was thinking of a topic to talk about today, I was thinking, what better topic to talk about than the concept or the topic of Man huwa Allah, right? Who is Allah? Because everything that we do, and it is the first pillar of Iman, right? Our first pillar of Iman is our sole belief, our sole worship of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And everything else that we do when it comes to the deen centers upon that, centers upon that tawheed of Allah, centers upon that oneness, centers upon that uniqueness and the singling out of worship that we do of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And everyone is supposed to ideally know about this topic, right? Because when we know about Allah, that is when we can further, it'll serve as a motivator for us to do actions and to do things that are pleasing towards Allah, so that we can get closer to Allah. Because if we don't know about something, how can we actually gain or work towards that? Right? In a basic concept that we all learn is, for any relationship, you have to foster that growth. You have to foster that relationship. Whether it's a mother to her child, when the child is young, the mother nurtures that child and raises that child, and that is what creates that bond. That is what creates that love between the mother and the child. And so, what better? Allah Azza wa Jalla, He loves us more than even our own parents. In some reports, 70 times more. And so if Allah Azza wa Jalla loves us more than even our own parents, then shouldn't it be a priority for us to, again, to learn about Allah, to know about who Allah Azza wa Jalla is, so that, again, the more we learn about Allah, the more tranquility, the more peace, the more sakina we will have in our lives, because we will always be looking for, that is when we obtain that sweetness of Iman. That is when we learn, and that is when what will, inshallah, again, continue to motivate us to do things that are pleasing towards Allah, and to stay away from things that are displeasing towards Allah Azza wa Jalla. And now, I'm not saying that that's an easy thing to do, right? This is something that each and every single one of us is going to have to go out of our way to learn about. Whether that's from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whether that's attending classes and lectures in which Allah Azza wa Jalla's name is mentioned and people are actively learning about Allah, whether that's reading the Quran. There are so many ways in which we can learn about Allah. But just as I said, we have to put some effort on our part to actually learn about Allah, right? And so again, we ask Allah to give us the tawfiq, to learn about Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I want to share a story of a man. And this story is mentioned in the Quran, where Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says in Surah Al-Baqarah, أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية على عروشها قال أنى يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها فأماته الله 100 عام ثم بعثه قال كم لبثت؟ قال لبثت يوما أو بعض يوم قال بل لبثت 100 عام فانظر إلى طعامك وشرابك لم يتسنى وانظر إلى حمارك ولنجعلك آية للناس وانظر إلى العظام كيف ننشزها ثم نكسوها لحما فلما تبين له قال أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. And so this was a story of a man. No one saw him and he saw no one. And Allah mentions this in the Quran, he's riding on his donkey, and he's passing by a town. And so we, in our terms today, we would call it a ghost town, right? There's no signs of life. It was completely dead. No signs of life whatsoever. And so, the man is riding. He has his provisions. He has his food. He has everything. And he's just thinking to himself, how can a town like this come back to life after it's completely gone, completely died out? Right? And he's just thinking, to his mind. And then he passes that town. And then, in that moment, Allah Azza wa Jal wanted to teach this man a story. Teach this man a lesson. Allah Azza wa Jal wanted to teach this man a lesson. And so when the man went to sleep that night, Allah Azza wa Jal caused him to die, or caused him to sleep for 1,000 years. So Allah Azza wa Jal caused this man to sleep for 1,000 years. And so when he woke up, Allah Azza wa Jal resurrected him. Allah Azza wa Jal asked him, how long do you think you slept for? And so the man, he responded with maybe a night, maybe 2 nights. And then Allah Azza wa Jal asked him to turn to his provision, turn to his donkey. And he could see that it had completely turned to dust. Right? His donkey was no longer, right? It was completely boneless. And then Allah Azza wa Jal caused him to look at his food. His food was also completely gone, right? Because when it comes to these kind of things, since Allah Azza wa Jal had caused him to sleep for such a long time, he had lost all of those things, right? And so then, we see that food is one of the quickest things to rot, right? And so that was the first thing that had rotted. And then Allah Azza wa Jal, in front of this man's eyes, he caused his ride, his donkey, to come back to life, right? And so the man, he's witnessing all of these things, and then while he sees all this, he says, now I know that Allah Azza wa Jal is capable of all things. Right? Allah Azza wa Jal wanted to show him that Allah can bring this, his ride, after it had died, back to life. And so then, how many, this caused me to think as I was going through this. How many times do we say we believe in something, but sometimes we might question, okay, I believe it, but how? Right? And so this is what Allah Azza wa Jal wanted to, and that is how we as Muslims should be, right? If Allah Azza wa Jal, or if the Prophet ﷺ told us something, we believe it, right? Just as, when you go to the doctor, they tell you things are going on inside your body, you may not necessarily see it, but you believe it because you believe that the doctor is telling you from a place of knowledge, right? So what about the ultimate source of knowledge, Allah Azza wa Jal? If Allah tells us something, then we must believe it, right? And so then, then the man, he continues on his journey, and he sees that again, now the town has come back to life, right? Allah Azza wa Jal had, over a set of 1,000 years, the town had come back to life. And again, this further caused the man to be astonished, and again to repeat this phrase, now I believe and now I know that Allah Azza wa Jal is capable of all things. And so again, this is exactly how, these stories are so that Allah Azza wa Jal can cause us to think, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, right? All these ayat, all these stories, all these things are not so that we can, for entertainment. It is so that, inshallah, we can learn from them and we can benefit from them. And one more story that I want to show is that this is not just something that, was for the average human being. Even the prophets themselves would sometimes talk to Allah, would ask Allah Azza wa Jal. And I want to share the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, as prophets, they converse with Allah. He's conversing with Allah Azza wa Jal, and he tells Allah, and he wanted to know how Allah Azza wa Jal revives the dead, right? So how Allah, he believed it, right? Just as we said, when Allah Azza wa Jal, he tells us something, we believe it. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, he mentioned the same thing. He said, Ya Allah, I believe, but it's just so that the heart can have some sort of contentment. And so then Allah Azza wa Jal, he again wanted to teach Ibrahim alayhi salam a lesson. So what did he tell Ibrahim alayhi salam? He told him to gather 4 birds. He told Ibrahim alayhi salam to gather 4 birds, and then he told Ibrahim alayhi salam to chop their heads off, all 4, and cut up the bodies into different pieces. And he told Ibrahim alayhi salam to mix all of these pieces of these 4 birds and to scatter them on top of 4 different mountain tops. And so here itself we can learn a lesson in that Ibrahim alayhi salam, he asked Allah Azza wa Jal for something. And then Allah Azza wa Jal put Ibrahim alayhi salam to work. Right? Because if we want to gain something, whether that's in terms of our akhirah, whether that's in terms of our dunya, I see a lot of professionals here. It wasn't overnight that you got to where you're at right now. It requires schooling, it requires education, it requires whatever it is, anything that we do in life has some sort of effort. And so Allah Azza wa Jal made Ibrahim alayhi salam exert this effort by taking those parts of those 4 different birds and putting it on 4 different mountain tops. And so then Allah Azza wa Jal, and he told Ibrahim alayhi salam that while he was doing that, to keep the heads of all 4 birds with him. So then when he completed that task, Allah Azza wa Jal showed Ibrahim alayhi salam and all the pieces of those 4 different birds came back to the original form before Ibrahim alayhi salam had slaughtered it. And not a single piece was in its incorrect place, not a single piece was missing. It was exactly as Ibrahim alayhi salam before he had slaughtered those birds. Allah Azza wa Jal brought it back to life. And so this, what do we learn about Allah Azza wa Jal from this is that again, قَدْ عَلِمْنَا مَا تَنْقُصُ الْأَرْضُ مِنْهُمْ وَعِنْدَنَا كِتَابٌ حَفِيظٌ. That this is how all of us will be resurrected on the Day of Judgment. Right? This is how Allah Azza wa Jal will cause us to die in this earth, and we will rest for a period of time, and then Allah Azza wa Jal on the Day of Qiyamah will bring back every single human being from the time of Adam alayhi salam till the last human being. Allah Azza wa Jal will resurrect every single one of us. And we ask Allah to give us success on that day. Allahumma ameen. And so again, we learn through this, we learned about Allah. What did we learn about Allah? That Allah Azza wa Jal, He can bring things back to life, and He is capable, He is al-Hakim, He is the wise, He is capable of all things, and specifically, He is capable of bringing life after it has died. And so, again, we look in the past and we look at the likes of, we hear some of the names of these scholars like Imam al-Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam al-Tirmidhi. We learn about all of these individuals because they spent their whole lives learning about Allah. They spent their whole lives so that they can translate, they can, preserve the legacies of the prophets, right? Preserve the legacy that the Prophet ﷺ had left, and preserve the deen so that we can, so that we have access to that knowledge that we have today. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What am I doing to help preserve, the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal? Because one of the signs of the Day of Judgment is that knowledge is going to be lifted. And how is knowledge going to be lifted? It's going to be lifted because the number of people of knowledge is going to significantly decrease. And the people are going to become more and more ignorant, right? They're not going to learn about their deen. They become in a state of ghafla. They become heedless, right? And so that is why it is incumbent, it is imperative upon us, because Allah will ask us about the time that we spent. We spent X number of time, with entertainment. We spent X number of time at work. We spent X number of time with this. How much time did I spend learning about the deen of Allah? How much time did I spend learning about Allah? Right? Because when we learn more about Allah, as I said, the more, inshallah, we will be motivated, and the more, it's kind of like a positive feedback. The more we learn about Allah, the more we want to learn about Allah, because we learn about all of these great characteristics, the mercy, we learn about the rahmah, we learn about the justice, we learn about all of these things about Allah, and it increases us in the love of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us the knowledge that will benefit us both in the dunya wal akhirah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين استغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأهدي صلاة الله ثم سلامه على أسعد خلق الله أجمعين، نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. وارض اللهم عن الخلفاء الراشدين المهديين أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي وعن سائر أصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. So we've kind of been talking about the importance of learning about Allah Azza wa Jal, learning about who Allah Azza wa Jal is, and learning about some of these names of Allah, some of these attributes, some of these characteristics of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so in the final portion of our khutbah, I want to kind of focus in on where Allah Azza wa Jal, He tells us that He's going to test us. Right? Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. That Allah Azza wa Jal is going to test us in our life. Right? Every single one of us, it's not an if, it's a when. Right? And so, what better way to respond when Allah Azza wa Jal tests us than in a way that's pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jal, right? And we can only do that if we know about Allah, right? So you'll find people in all sorts of problems, right? People will be having issues, financial issues, people will be sick, people will have issues with their children. Every single person is going through one thing or another. And so the more you learn about Allah, the more you learn another name of Allah Azza wa Jal, that Allah is Al-Kareem, right? Allah Azza wa Jal, He's the most generous. Right? You'll find people turning to their co-workers, to their parents, to their family members, and when you ask them, did you even make a single dua to Allah regarding a situation? And then they'll say, oh, that's a good idea, I should probably do that. But when in reality, if they had turned to Allah at the moment of that calamity striking, that maybe Allah Azza wa Jalla would have made their situation so much easier. Right? And Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says that if Allah encouraged you, if Allah motivated you to make a dua in the first place, if you already made a dua, then that is a sign that Allah Azza wa Jalla, He wants good for you. Right? And so that should be the first thing that we turn to, not the last thing. Right? We turn to Allah and then we seek out the worldly means in order to alleviate us from whatever difficulty it is we're facing. Because remember, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He's our maker. He designed us inside and out. Right? Just like if you have an issue with a computer, you go to the computer engineer and you say, what can I do to do this? And if he tells you something, you will listen to them. Right? So for example, if they say there's a software issue with this, don't use this or don't do that. A doctor tells you take this, take that. We're more than happy to listen. But why is it that, and I'm talking about myself, why is it that when Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us something, we sometimes can be hesitant? Right? When in reality, again, if we truly turn towards Allah, that is where we will find the ultimate peace, that is where we will find the ultimate contentment, that is where we will find the ultimate sakinah. And we learn again, Allah Azza wa Jalla is Al-Kareem, right? So, and for example, right, I'll give you an example. In Ramadan, there's a night, Laylatul Qadr, right? That if you worship Allah Azza wa Jalla on this night, that is equivalent to a lifetime worth of worship, right? 83 years. And sometimes some of these things we can't even fathom, right? We can't even imagine. Right? Because imagine you and I getting the reward of a lifetime of worship just from worshiping a single night. And yet, subhanAllah, you'll find some Muslims, they disobey Allah on that night of Laylatul Qadr. Right? And that partially is because the knowledge of Allah, the yaqeen, the strength of the belief in Allah has not reached here. Because if I truly knew, imagine if I told you, if you show up on this day, you will get something worldly related. You will get 1,000 cars. You will find everybody going to that place at that time. They will be camping out, waiting, right? So why isn't it that when Ramadan comes around, people start whining, I have to fast all day, or I have to spend these nights in prayer, and it's because the knowledge of Allah is not. We have a weakness in our iman. There's a weakness in our belief, and so we ask Allah again to allow us and to motivate us to learn about Him. And we ask Allah to give us the knowledge that is beneficial, that will benefit us both in ad-dunya wal akhirah. And always to allow us to turn to Him in terms of difficulty. There's a hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha where she said, or this is just a statement of Aisha, not a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but a statement of Aisha, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, where she said, ask Allah even if it's for a shoelace. Right? Ask Allah even if it's for a shoelace. Because who is truly capable of everything? It's Allah Azza wa Jalla. And that is, again, it's to make us think. Sometimes we might think, oh, it's small, I can just but Aisha radiallahu anha is saying, even for something as simple, as small as a shoelace, ask Allah Azza wa Jalla. Because Allah Azza wa Jalla, truly, He is the one, and the only one who can make the impossible possible. He's the only one who can make the impossible possible. And I'm sure all of us have experienced some of these situations where we thought there's no way out, and then Allah Azza wa Jalla made a way for us. And so again, we ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to grant us the tawfiq to learn about it. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to ease the situation of the Muslims around the world. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to forgive us and to grant us Jannatul Firdaus. Allahumma ighfir lil mu'minina wal mu'minat wal muslimina wal muslimat al ahya'i minhum wal amwat innaka ya mawlana sami'un qareebun mujibud da'awat. عباد الله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. عباد الله رحمكم الله، اتقوا الله، إن الله تعالى يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه على نعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر، والله يعلم ما تصنعون وأقيموا الصلاة.